Hey guys, welcome back. We are doing the next section of the Bhagavad Gita today. I'm just going to get rid of this little fluffy monster who's tangled in my wire. So we'll kind of do the same thing that we did last time, where I just kind of read it first and then we'll go through it and break it down and do some Q&A. So one thing I want to just mention, though, before we get into it, in this chapter, Krishna refers to what are called the gunas, and he doesn't really take the time in this chapter to explain what that is. So I just want to we will get to it later in the book and have a larger discussion on it at that time, but just so that you're not completely lost with what he's talking about, I thought it might be helpful to just kind of just quickly explain what that is. So there are three gunas or modes of being in the universe: tamas, rajas, and sattva. So sattva, it corresponds to the color white. It is kind of a very pure, high vibe sort of mode of being. Rajas corresponds to the color red. It's kind of a more kind of passionate, agitated energy. And then tamas, which corresponds to the color black, is lethargy, decay, death. So those are the sort of three gunas, and everything in the material universe has this interplay of these gunas that make it up. So that's what he's referring to when he talks about that, but don't get too hung up on it, because we will come back to that later in this series for a wider discussion. Also, by the way, can you guys, is the sound okay with this? I'm never really sure if this little lapel mic is working correctly. So if you guys can just say in the chat if you are happy with the sound, that would be super helpful. Okay, well, nobody's saying anything, so that might mean you can't hear me. Okay, good. It sounds good. Great. Thank you, John. All right, so once again, for anybody who's new, I'm just using the Stephen Mitchell translation of this, which is, I find, very readable. But I mean, the main reason I'm using this is it's the only copy I have right now. I know a lot of people prefer different translations, and when people ask what's the best translation, honestly, whatever one you can get your hands on to read. Read a few of them, decide what you like best. So this is chapter 3, the yoga of action. Arjuna said, "If you think that understanding is superior to action, Krishna, why do you keep urging me to engage in this savage act? With words that seem inconsistent, your teaching has bewildered my mind. Tell me, what must I do to arrive at the highest good?" The Blessed Lord said, "In this world there are two main paths, the yoga of understanding for contemplative men, and for men who are active, the yoga of action. Not by avoiding actions does a man gain freedom from action, and not by renunciation alone can he reach the goal. No one, not even for an instant, can exist without acting. All beings are compelled, however unwilling, by the three strands of nature called gunas. He who controls his actions but lets his mind dwell on the sense objects is deluding himself and spoiling his search for the deepest truth. The superior man is he whose mind can control his senses. With no attachment to results, he engages in the yoga of action. Do any actions you must do, since action is better than inaction. Even the existence of your body depends on necessary actions. The whole world becomes a slave to its own activity, Arjuna. If you want to truly be free, perform all actions as worship. The Lord of creatures formed worship together with mankind and said, 'By worship you will always be fruitful and your wishes will be fulfilled. By worship you will nourish the gods and the gods will nourish you in turn. By nourishing one another you assure the well-being of all. Nourished by your worship, the gods will grant whatever you desire. He who accepts their gifts and gives nothing back is a thief. Good men are released from their sins when they eat food offered in worship, but the wicked devour their own evil when they cook for themselves alone. Beings arise from food, food arises from rain arises from worship from ritual action from God from the deathless self, Thus, the all-present God requires the worship of men. He who fails to keep turning the wheel thus set in motion has damaged the working of the world and has wasted his life, Arjuna. But the man who delights in the self, who feels pure contentment and finds perfect peace in the self, for him there is no need to act. He has nothing to achieve by action, nothing to gain by inaction, nor does he depend on any person outside himself. Without concern for results, perform the necessary action. Surrendering all attachments, accomplish life's highest good. Only by selfless action did Janaka and other wise kings govern and thus assure the well-being of the whole world. Whatever a great man does, ordinary people will do. Whatever standards he sets, everyone else will follow. In all the three worlds, Arjuna, there is nothing I need to do, nothing I must attain, and yet I engage in action. For if I were to refrain from my tireless continual action, mankind would follow my example and would also not act, Arjuna. If I stopped acting, these worlds would plunge into ruin. Chaos would overpower all beings. Mankind would be destroyed. Though the unwise cling to their actions, watching for results, the wise are free of attachments and act for the well-being of the whole world. The wise man does not unsettle the minds of the ignorant. Quietly acting in the spirit of yoga, he inspires them to do the same. Actions are really performed by the working of the three gunas, but a man deluded by the I sense imagines, I am the doer. The wise man knows that when objects act on the senses, it is merely the gunas acting on the gunas. Thus, he is unattached. Deluded by the gunas, men grow, attached to the gunas' actions. The insightful should not disturb the minds of these foolish men. Performing all actions for my sake, desireless, absorbed in the self, indifferent to I and mine, let go of your grief and fight. Men who constantly practice this teaching of mine, Arjuna, who trust it with all their heart, are freed from the bondage of actions. But those who, mistrustful, half-hearted, fail to practice my teaching, wander in the darkness, lost, stupefied by delusion. Even the wise man acts in accordance with his inner nature. All beings follow their nature. What good can repression do? Craving and aversion arise when the senses encounter sense objects. Do not fall prey to these two brigands blocking your path. It is better to do your own duty badly than to perform another's perfectly. You are safe from harm when you do what you should be doing. Arjuna said, what is it that drives a man to evil action, Krishna, even against his will, as if some force made him do it? The blessed Lord said, that force is desire. It is anger arising from the guna called rajas, deadly and all-devouring. That is the enemy here. As a fire is obscured by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, as a fetus is wrapped in its membrane, so wisdom is obscured by desire. Wisdom is destroyed, Arjuna, by the constant enemy of the wise, which, flaring up as desire, blazes with insatiable flames. Desire dwells in the senses, the mind, and the understanding. In all these, it obscures wisdom and perplexes the embodied self. Therefore, you must first control your senses, Arjuna, then destroy this evil that prevents you from ever knowing the truth. Men say that the senses are strong, but the mind is stronger than the senses. The understanding is stronger than the mind. The strongest is the self. Knowing the self, sustaining the self by the self, Arjuna, kill the difficult to conquer enemy called desire. All right, so I'm going to go back through this and break down a few of these points that just kind of stood out to me. And as you can see, like by all my little notes, I have quite a few of them. I'll try not to take too long on them because I do want to leave time for questions and I don't want this stream to go on for too long today. So Krishna starts out by saying that there are two main paths, the yoga of understanding or contemplation and the yoga of action. This is something I'll get into a little bit more in the next Revolt episode when it comes out, but keep in mind that on a higher plane, action and contemplation are non-different, and the differentiation of these two things really arose because of the need for castes and the splitting of the priestly caste and the warrior caste into two separate and differentiated units. Let's see, what else did I have on this page? Okay, so Krishna also says that he who controls his actions but lets his mind dwell on sense objects is deluding himself and spoiling his search for the deepest truth. I mean, he's kind of, what he's saying here really is that it's not enough to be physically disciplined. You have to be mentally disciplined as well. One can lead to the other, certainly. For example, you might see people who are just like, oh, you just need to lift weights, bro, right? Well, you could achieve mental discipline through doing that if you did that intentionally. There is a degree where maybe you, in the practice of training the body, connecting the mind to the muscle, maintaining like a singular focus on what you're doing, sure, you could achieve mental discipline through doing that as well. But because most people just really aren't particularly conscious of what they're doing when they're doing it, most people don't really achieve that synthesis. So Krishna says that if you really want to be free, you need to perform all actions as worship. So what does that mean? Well, first of all, it means acting without attachment to outcomes, which is what we covered in the last talk on this. In the previous chapter, we discussed the concept of, doing your duty without thought for the fruits of your labors and being unattached to the outcome, being equanimous. And so that's part of like performing an action as worship and doing it with Dharma in mind, with God in mind, with the idea that this is your sacred duty. It's just something that must be done, whether you want to do it or not, whether you're going to get something from it or not, that's beside the point. And he goes on to talk a little bit in the section following of, from worship, worship arises from ritual action arises from God, and so on and so forth. I would suggest, I don't want to go too much into that, but if anybody's interested in the relation of like the worship and the ritual action and God and everything like that, I would refer you to my Revolt Against the Modern World, episode 6, The Mystery of the Right, which goes into detail about how these things are connected. Krishna says, he who fails to keep turning the wheel thus set in motion has damaged the working of the world and has wasted his life. There's kind of, this is something really interesting that comes up over and over in like religious texts or esoteric texts. It plays a big factor in astrology. This idea of the universe as like this cosmic clock, and it's always turning. Stuff like the precession of the equinoxes, or the idea of the wheel of samsara. So when you hear, at least when I hear Krishna talking about this wheel that's set in motion, that the idea that if you don't keep this wheel turning, that you're damaging the working of the world. There is something about the material world that requires this continual activity, right? It's, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the concept of entropy, this idea that eventually all things just kind of decay and degrade and fall into disorder, right? You have to continually push back against entropy because it is the natural state of materiality to fall towards entropy, towards chaos. And so it's that continual activity that sustains order, that sustains dharma, sustains life. So that's probably, of all the verses in this chapter, that one's probably my favorite, and one that I feel like I could just sit and think about that for a really long time. This idea that if you, it's almost like sticking your finger in the clock and preventing the little minute hand from ticking downward, right? Then you're going to jam the gears of the clock, like on one of those old-fashioned clocks. You're damaging the clock just like you're damaging the world. So refusing to act is, in a way, almost kind of sinful even. But the idea is that you're meant to act with detachment and act as a form of worship, act in accordance with your dharmic duty, not acting with a view towards your own desires. And the reason for that is because that's going to generate karma. And Krishna says that it's only by selfless action that Janaka and the other wise kings governed. These are the sacred kings. They're the Chakravartins. Again, if you refer back to the Revolt series, you'll recall the discussion on that, I think in episode 4, Lord of Justice and Peace. And Krishna himself says that even he must act. There's nothing he needs to do, nothing he has to attain, but he still engages in action. And he's like, well, why is that? And again, it's because it keeps chaos at bay. He explicitly says, if I stopped acting, these worlds would plunge into ruin. Chaos would overpower all beings. Mankind would be destroyed. I just find that so fascinating. So, we need to act because God says that we must in order to keep in line with Dharma. And in acting in this way, we are freeing ourselves from karma rather than generating new karma, which is what happens when you act with attachment. Dharma on the one hand can refer to your true nature or your essence, but it can also refer to actions that bring us back to our essential nature, to rightful action. And all people have a dharma that's intrinsic to their character. It's true to who they are. So the fact that you even have a body here in this world is proof that you have karma. It's basically like you, sorry, I lost my train of thought there, but basically the body is something we acquire because we had past desires. And so that karma forces us to then take a body in this material world. And we create more karma the more that we create action born out of desire. And so, you might say, oh, well, there's good karma and there's bad karma. From a more metaphysical point of view, all karma is bad karma. Even you can have karma that is subjectively experienced as positive or as negative, but the fact is you generated karma. And whether it feels good or it feels bad, it's still keeping you stuck in that cycle of rebirth and death, that samsaric current. You're not being liberated. So the idea behind this yoga of action is that when you take action in a worshipful way, doing your rightful duty, unattached to the fruits of your labors, then you are doing action that isn't creating more karma for yourself. And it's through that you can start to liberate yourself from your karmic burden. So there is kind of this connection between dharma and karma, because ultimately karma is just the results of past actions, and it doesn't matter whether those actions were good actions or not. Some karma is more fixed than other karma. If people are interested in that, we can maybe get into that a little bit more in the Q&A. So that's something we need to be mindful of when we're acting in the world. The other thing I especially wanted to point out with this is what Krishna has to say about anger. And the thing, he points to anger as arising from desire. It's part of the guna rajas, that more passionate, fiery guna. There's a saying from the Buddha that says something to the effect of, I'm maybe not quoting it exactly right, but he says, anger has a honeyed tip and a poisoned root. And like self-righteous anger often feels really good, right? Like if you think about, maybe you're driving in traffic and you're stuck behind like a really annoying driver and you're starting to get kind of road rage and you're ranting about him to your passenger. And, there's part of that even though like you're frustrated, you still feel good about it. Any kind of anger that's making you that makes your ego sort of like puff up a little bit and makes you think, well, I'm right and this person's is wrong. And but ultimately that anger is like, it's a low vibe emotion. It's hurting your soul and it's dragging you kind of deeper into desire, because when you're angry about something, it's because you didn't get what you desired. To put it really simply, think about the last time that you were angry about something, like you didn't get the outcome that you wanted. Somebody upset you, something didn't go your way. Just you woke up on the wrong side of the bed. I don't know. So what Krishna is kind of trying to explain to Arjuna here is that your mind can be either your best friend or your worst enemy. And if you fail to conquer and control your mind, then it is going to control you rather than being a tool that you use at your disposal. So there's kind of like this, where did I put my little set of notes? I have so many Post-it notes, just like literally just everywhere. So I lost the one I was going to refer to, but basically he's, I can probably just find it in the book anyway, where he's talking about the kind of hierarchy. He says, men say that the senses are strong, but the mind is stronger than the senses. The understanding is stronger than the mind. The strongest is the self. And that's the capital S self. What he says next then, knowing the capital S self, sustaining the lowercase self by the capital S self, Arjuna, kill the difficult to conquer enemy called desire. And if you recall, he was giving these analogies, as fire is obscured by smoke, as a mirror is obscured by dust, and so on and so forth. Our self, our higher self, that capital S self, and the wisdom that comes with it is often obscured by this lowercase s self. It's obscured by desire. It's obscured by materiality. It's obscured by like just all the day-to-day crap that we have to deal with. So there's a way in which you need to kind of subjugate those sense desires to the mind, subjugate the mind to your higher intelligence, to your soul, and have it ordered in this hierarchy. Most people, though, function in a way that has that totally backwards. And as a result, they're controlled by their sense desires, or they're controlled by a runaway mind that is like a galloping herd of wild horses just pulling them this way and that. Maybe you've heard it referred to as the monkey mind, right? And I swear I must have talked about this on another live stream somewhere. I can't recall whose show it was. It was a while ago, but just do this here now for a second. Close your eyes and focus on your breath. Focus on the sensation of the breath coming in and out of your nostrils, going like feel it across your upper lip. And I'm just going to stop talking for a few seconds, and I want you to see how many breaths you can get through before your mind starts to wander to something other than your breath. Go. Okay, so let me know if any of you managed to go that long without letting your mind wander away from your breath for even an instant. If you managed to do that, say so in the comments and let us all know so that we can give you a round of applause. But I bet most of you didn't get more than 2 or 3 breaths. And there's nothing wrong with that. That's okay. That's just like, that's perfectly normal. But it's just to illustrate how difficult it is to control the mind when you're not actively trying to train it. Like, your body will instantly start to throw up obstacles to that. It doesn't. Part of the reason is that once you do that, you really start to examine the contents of the mind, including the ego, right? So the ego does not like to be looked at. It does not want you to see it for what it is. And so it's going to continually throw up these hurdles for you. Oh, I have an itch. My shoulder hurts. I wonder what's for dinner. Like, just, it'll be the stupidest stuff that comes up in your mind too, right? And so this is kind of like what the practice of meditation ultimately is the constantly noticing that your mind has wandered, bringing it back to the breath, or bringing it back to your mantra, or whatever other kind of meditation you do. There's a lot of different meditations. Jeannie says, try out Kat's meditation video. She still uses it. That's awesome. I'm so glad to hear that. Zurius and I would actually like to make another one, and I just really haven't had the time to sit down and chat with him about that properly. But I do have a meditation video. It's just like a 15-minute guided meditation, and it's designed to keep moving your focus to different parts of your body so that you're not sitting there just trying to focus on your breath, which is, honestly, it's really hard to do. And I think a lot of people feel like, oh, they are bad at meditation because their mind is constantly wandering. Maybe you sit there for half an hour trying to focus on your breath, and maybe you noticed 2 whole breaths in that time, and the rest of the time your mind was just off somewhere, right? That's okay. The meditation is the practice of just sitting there and failing over and over and accepting that you're failing and being okay with that. You failed. Bring it, just come back to the breath. Be equanimous with that. Don't judge it. And Gino says it would be amazing to do another collaboration. It would. I really should. I should get on that. Thank you guys for reminding me to do that. So when we start to develop a discipline of controlling our minds, and we can turn our mind into a tool, which we can use for, like, we can just direct it with laser sharp focus wherever we want. How many of you guys have trouble sitting and reading a book without distraction for over an hour? Most people these days find that they can't do that. They want to check their phones, or they need to get up and walk around or get a snack. Like, they cannot just sit and focus completely on what they're reading. How much knowledge are you missing out on because you can't sit and read a book? Elia Seal says the yoga of mundane action during a retail job. You can turn anything into a meditation, honestly, just simply by being conscious, being present. So a lot of times, the mind is wandering while the body is doing something else, and we want to bring our whole being into harmony. And when that happens, you develop you develop an authenticity. There's a lot of people who kind of try to show off a version of themselves that isn't in line with who they actually are internally. And it's all about, the appearances. And you see this a lot in the New Age community, where you've got these people who want to style themselves as like these enlightened gurus and stuff like that, but it's all just an act. And well, even anywhere not in the New Age community, you find that with almost any kind of spiritual people. You find it with people, even like you find it with like these Instagram influencers. They want to present to you a version of themselves that isn't actually real. And if you saw what their real lives were like, they would probably be really embarrassed by that, because it wouldn't measure up to what they're actually showing you. So when you can develop authenticity in your life, well, you can live with integrity. You can live with honesty. You don't have to pretend with these things. And also then, because you don't, like, the need to want to like pretend like that, to create an appearance that isn't really real, that's born out of desire too. That's creating karma for you. So, this world is, what can I say? It's hard to live in this world. It's hard to not create karma. It's hard to not have desires. And we're all here because at some point we failed in that regard. We're all here because we have karma, whether we have a good life or a bad life, whether we're spiritual people or atheists, it doesn't matter. We are all here in the same boat, riding along on planet Earth in our fleshy bodies that tell us, eat the cake, sleep in, skip your workout, go on Tinder dates, whatever is the fun thing that you do. Why does my mind always come back to cake? I don't even hardly ever eat cake. Maybe it's because I don't eat cake that I'm just always thinking about it. What can I say? Sense desires. So I think I'll wrap that up there because I've been rambling on about this stuff for about half an hour now, and I think that's a good time to take some questions. So I'll just scroll up in the chat and see if you guys had any, but feel free to throw them at me now if you've got any that you're waiting to ask. All right. Christopher DeSanctis here gives a really good definition of the three gunas. Thank you, Christopher. Sattva, ascent through the hierarchy of being. Tamas, descent through the hierarchy of being, so into materiality. Rajas, actualization of one particular level of being. Thank you for sharing that. That's really good. All right. You guys had a lot of comments here, actually, while I was reading that. All right. It's also helpful if you guys actually tag me in the comments too, so that I can see them, because I don't want to miss them. Nick Bravo asks, how does one discover one's dharma to know what to do? Well, you have to clear away the dust from the mirror. You have to be able to look at your capital S self and discover your wisdom. Now, you might feel innately that you are kind of like called to one thing or another, feel like something's your nature. This is one thing that, I know it's not everybody's cup of tea, but one thing I like to use astrology for is that it is really helpful for taking an in-depth look at your own dharma and karma and trying to help sort of figure out, like, what is it that I have to work with here in this material conditioned existence? What am I, what is my inner nature? How can I live in line with that? So, I mean, there are a number of ways to do it, but the fundamental principle is you've got to wipe the dust off from that mirror. You have to break free of all of these sensory things, all of these desires that are clouding that transcendental wisdom that you have inside of yourself. Sorry for all my stuttering today. I don't know what's wrong with my mouth. I think I'm probably just tired. Usually I feel like I'm really poorly spoken today. All right. Okay, you guys had a lot of comments, but not a lot of questions. Well, that's good. I'm glad. I hope that means that you guys were understanding it while I was going through that. Bjarki says, meditation is no joke. It can be very dangerous. You need a strong mind. Well, there is some truth to this. On the one hand, meditation helps you develop a strong mind. On the other hand, there are certain people for whom it can be a little risky, just like taking psychedelics can be risky for people. So, for example, if you Google up people's experiences at a Vipassana retreat, which is a 10-day silent retreat where they teach you like 100 hours of meditation over 10 days. It's really intense. And you'll have like these transcendent experiences there. But some people who have trauma or who are, otherwise maybe a bit mentally damaged in some way, sometimes that can actually bring that to the forefront in a way that, they're not really equipped to deal with. And if you know that about yourself, if you know that you have that in your mind, that you might struggle with that, tread carefully, seek out a legitimate teacher who can actually guide you through that. Go slowly, back off if you feel like you need to. So basically, when you're doing that kind of meditation, it's like going into, think of your mind as like this dusty old attic that you haven't been into basically since you were born, and who knows what kind of crap is up there. There's tons of dust, there's, I don't know, rats or whatever living up there, and you got to start cleaning this out, and it's going to get dirtier before it gets cleaner, because you're going to stir up all that dust and you're going to disturb the rat's nest, and you're going to have to like dump the boxes out and pick through it and be like, do I want to save this? Do I want to get rid of that? And it's going to take a long time. So a lot of people feel like because they're struggling in this way that it's not working or it's harming them. And I'm not any kind of enlightened sage here, but my advice would be, trust yourself. And if it's not working for you, if it's pushing you to a point where you really can't handle it, there's no shame in just backing off from that. And maybe you try something else. Like for some people, maybe they would do better with something a little bit more body-based, like yoga. Or this is honestly, I think, why so many guys are like, just lift weights, bro, right? Because as I said, that can be a form of meditation too. It can be when you are really just channeling all that into the body and through the body. I think sometimes it's a little easier than just going right up into your head. So those are just some options for people to consider. One hour, 30 minutes is my maximum for Gino's meditation. If you're a beginner, honestly, 15 minutes is going to feel like an eternity. Don't overdo it at the start. You don't want to burn yourself out on it. Virtuoso musicians enter a meditative state when performing. I always felt like singing for me was a kind of a meditative activity, especially just like doing the warm-ups and stuff, and just like very being extremely focused on just like getting the note and getting the tone correctly, and putting it on. My singing teacher used to talk about putting them all on the golden string, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Are you tripping or something? And she's like, no, there's a golden string. Turns out she's got like a synesthesia, and she actually like sees sound. And she didn't even know that was a thing. And I just remember thinking that was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. And I'm like, okay, we'll put it on your imaginary golden string. All right. Vingo here is a hardcore reader, reading 200 plus pages in one sitting. Good for you. I remember when I was a kid doing these MS readathons to raise money for multiple sclerosis, and I'd have to go around and collect donations from people for, they'd make a pledge based on how much I would read. And I remember going to my next door neighbor, and he pledged 25 cents per page. And I remember going home, I was like, yes, I'm gonna win. My dad sees this and he marches right back over there. He's like, I don't think you know how much she reads. And so he took back his pledge and only pledged like a flat $25 or something. And I was over here thinking I was going to get thousands out of him. Nick asks, how does one discover one's dharmic duty? I think I'd already answered your question. But if I didn't, please feel free to ask for more clarification. The difference between fixed karma and mutable karma. Okay, so let me give you an example. Let's say like there is some karma that it's already barreling so far and fast down the track that you just can't stop it, right? Let's say you strike a match. You can still blow that out. Done, fire's gone. Let's say you strike the match and then you drop it in the dry grass. Okay, you still have time to put that out. But let's say you don't put it out. Now it's blowing up into like this big bushfire, and before you know it, you've got this massive fire on your hand that's burning down your whole town. So there comes a point when you can't really easily stop that karma. Much easier to stop when you've just lit the match and can still blow it out. a lot harder to stop when it's already burning down your town and you just kind of have to wait for it to burn itself out. So when we, like, karma is just simply consequences of past actions. And that's actions we take in this life. It's actions we've taken in past lives. I personally don't find it particularly helpful to think about, like, oh, your life is this way because you did something in the past and so you deserve it. Because, like, how does that help people to feel like they're being punished for something that they don't even remember? But the fact is that at some point an action was taken that resulted in your life being what it is. And, you know, I would say, like, once you're born into your body, that's pretty fixed karma right there. Just your own body, your family, that's a very fixed karma that you can't change. You know, now maybe you make some minor mistake at some point in life and then you quickly correct it and then it's fine, right? So there's kind of like different degrees of this kind of stuff. Bjarki says, consider doing a stream specifically on Evelyn's view of the European motif of the Tree of Wisdom as being in sharp opposition to the sinful Tree of Wisdom in the Hebraic cycle. That is a great suggestion. Can you just, can you message me that on Twitter so that I can be reminded of it? And I'll write it, I'll add it. I keep a list of suggestions that people give me, and eventually I'll probably get to it. So Frank asks, great discussion. Does entropy not explain why life grows more complicated over time? You know, it could. Yeah, certainly. Part of that too is that you're also just accruing a lot more karma as your life goes on. Your life is getting more and more complex, more things are added into it. And that's going to be the case unless you're one of those rare people who just kind of swears off everything and goes and retires into a monastery with no possessions. And then you're going to have a very simple life. But that would be a case of, you know, detachment from the world. All right. Joel says he's enjoying these conversations greatly. Thank you, Joel. I'm glad you're enjoying that. Gino has a great question here. Many people fall asleep meditating silently. Well, I find it stressful, energizing, or anxiety provoking. Am I doing something wrong? No, I wouldn't say you're doing something wrong. There's no, like, one person's experience of meditation is not going to be your experience, and not even all of your experiences of meditation are going to be the same. So don't get attached to a particular experience while meditating. Just accept that it is what it is. And a lot of times I think the reason people do find it stressful or anxiety provoking, or that it's getting them, you know, worked up in some way, is that they are not being equanimous with the experience, and they're starting to get agitated as they look for an outcome. You know, there have been times when I've been meditating and felt like I was like, I went into this expecting a certain outcome. I just wanted to relax. I just wanted to de-stress. And I find myself getting frustrated that that's not happening. And then it just becomes this cycle. Now, some people will fall asleep meditating because they're quieting their mind and they're kind of putting themselves into that semi-dream-like state in a way. But that's not going to be everybody's experience. And even people, like, I can fall asleep meditating. I can stress myself out meditating. So you're not doing something wrong. The only thing you need to do is come back to the breath, or come back to your mantra, or whatever kind of meditation you're doing. Just remember to just, like, think of it like this. If you are sitting on a bench on the side of the road and you're watching all this traffic pass, right? And maybe you notice a red sports car go by and it really kind of catches your eye. Do you get up and run after it? Or do you just say, oh, there went a red sports car, that was cool, and then just go back to watching the traffic? You know, you shouldn't be getting up to run after the red sports car, and you shouldn't be getting up to run after the thoughts that come into your head. Just notice that it's there, accept that it's there. That's the experience you're having. Okay, just sit with it and go back to the breath. Also, I apologize if you guys can hear that really loud music in the background. One of my neighbors is like having a party. It's Easter week here, and so it's going to get louder and louder as the week goes on. I don't think I'll be sleeping much this week or meditating much. All right. Just looking for you guys' questions here. Looks like you guys are having a good discussion here. Okay, well, I don't see any more questions. If there's anything else that you guys would like me to comment more on, anything else you want to ask, last call for that. Otherwise, we can wrap it up a little bit earlier today than usual. We're about 45 minutes, so that's not too bad. It's I would imagine being a Saturday afternoon too, people probably have stuff that they want to get ready to do or go out to do. Or I suppose for some people it's already like late at night on Saturday if you're in Europe. Okay, well, it looks, one last question coming in. All right. Jimmy asks, I often fall asleep from meditation. I, however, have very lucid dreams when this happens. I do know I'm dreaming and I can actually manipulate the dream somewhat. Have you experienced this? I haven't been able to lucid dream since I was a kid, and it used to happen to me a lot. And as an adult, it doesn't really happen to me. I hardly ever dream though anymore, to be honest. But I have heard that when people fall asleep from meditating, they either have really vivid dreams or they have no dreams at all. For me, at one point, like when I first started meditating, and it resulted in me actually quitting meditation on a number of occasions before then trying to go back to it, I would start having intense nightmares that would wake me up, keep me back asleep, and then I would end up with like insomnia for months at a time because of it. And I would just get to the point where I physically couldn't continue with the meditation because my sleep was so disrupted. And in hindsight, I'm kind of like, I was probably on the precipice of something and should have just continued and pushed through it. But it's hard to meditate when you just feel physically exhausted, like your body just feels like it's going to shut down. Trust it. Like when you don't sleep for a few months, it really takes its toll on you. So if you're having lucid dreams and you can control what's happening, I would reckon that that's a lot better than terrible nightmares, right? Okay, so Jeannie asks, when approximately will the new Evola video be released? Hopefully within a month. So it's, it basically needs the video created for it, but the script is done. Part of the reason it took so long is that, I've moved twice in the last 7 or 8 months now. I had to move overseas, and it's been a really difficult adjustment. I don't have any of my stuff. I've basically been living out of suitcases for the last 8 months, which means I don't have my books. And this particular episode, it's on the hierarchical relationship between royalty and priesthood. A bit of a dry subject, I have to say, but it's also covering one of Evola's most controversial takes, and he is completely at odds with the rest of the traditionalist school because of this. And I really wanted to be able to present this in a way that, I'm presenting Evola's ideas. I have to be fair to and true to his work and his words. I need to steelman him. But at the same time, Gwinan, Kumaraswamy, they had some interesting criticisms of him that I thought it would be good to kind of delve into. And also Evola has his own response to that. And I was trying to I went back and forth with so many people having discussions about this and I didn't want to misrepresent Evola, but I also don't want to misrepresent what is the truth. And I think I've arrived finally at a really good balance. And so that script for the next episode was written and rewritten so many times. And I went back to that chapter and other books just repeatedly trying to figure out what is the best way to do this. So I have something I'm happy with now, but that's kind of basically the whole drama as to why it's taken me almost a year to get the next episode out, but it is coming. So, okay. Any other questions? Oh, you're very welcome for that PDF. If anybody's interested, from the last show, someone had asked about like European spirituality, and I sent him a PDF regarding rune magic. So if anyone else is interested in that, feel free to email me and I'll send it to you. All right. Well, I think that is it for today. Thank you guys for coming to hang out with me. And it's probably a good time to stop because that music is getting louder and louder. I'm sure you guys have noticed. And okay, Vingle asked, have I had sleep paralysis? It's terrifying. I used to as a kid. I haven't as an adult, but yeah, it is. And Julius Flavius is always a simp in female streams. This is a no simp zone, so I don't want anybody liking me just because I'm a woman. You can only like me for my mind. All right. And John Slaymaker says he loves these Gita streams. Thank you. I don't know if I'll do one next Saturday just because it's Easter weekend, and I have a live stream next weekend on someone else's channel that I want to be prepared for. I think we're going to be discussing the symbols of the resurrection in honor of Easter. So we'll probably skip next week and then be back the following week. I'm going to try to stay consistent with these Saturday streams until we finish the Gita. So, all right. Thank you guys once again for being here and enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'll see you next time.